KCRW sponsors include A24, presenting Moonlight, a film chronicling 3 chapters in the life of a young black man discovering his identity and experiencing first love as he moves from childhood into manhood. In theaters now.
Hi, I'm Elvis Mitchell, and thanks for listening to The Treatment. Some of the most entertaining stories produced today, however, are not on the big screen, but they can be heard on KCRW's Unfictional, intimate stories and artful documentaries crafted by some of the most talented radio producers across the world. Check it out. You can find Unfictional on KCRW's iTunes page. From KCRW Santa Monica and KCRW.com, it's The Treatment. Welcome to The Treatment. I'm Elvis Mitchell. My guest, the creator of Mad Men and his executive producer, Matthew Weiner. The show has won more Emmy Awards for Outstanding Drama than any show in the history of cable. Its beginning is complemented the last 7 episodes, starting April 5th. And he's sitting across from me. Matt, thanks so much for coming back.
Oh, it's so great to be here, Elvis.
What's so interesting about watching the show, and it's one of these things that a lot of people don't seem to notice, is that Don Draper's clothes haven't really changed. But you really see it in the first episode of this season that
they haven't changed?
Not that much. I mean, he's not a contemporary guy the way the other characters are dressing more of that period. He's still a little bit behind.
He's I would not consider it behind. I would consider it classic. He is not a faddist. And I even heard John Hamm actually in an interview talking about Don being out of touch or something like that. I do not see it that way at all. I think that Janie Bryant would disagree with you.
Costume designer.
Yes, my costume designer. That basically starting from his marriage to Meghan, you start seeing him in things like, this is when people used to get fired for not wearing a white shirt at IBM. So he's wearing a blue shirt. He's wearing plaids.
The plaids, in fact, after the California trip was when the plaids really started to permeate the show. You could see the influence of California on him.
Well, we always use California as a chance for him to be Dick Whitman. That's where you'll see him without socks and
polo shirts.
T-shirts, polo shirts, things like that. And my feeling is that the way that period is treated in the movies is a little bit different than the way it's treated in real life. And obviously, nothing's an accident when you're like making up a TV show and like testing every single person. But I did want to say about this character, I don't think he's out of touch. I think he's eternal. I think he's, guys look like him, in Playboy in 1970. The whole like super bushy hair, bushy mustaches, everything that sort of happened as it went on. It's not for everybody.
But it was starting to change, especially in a business affected by the media, where he'd be more likely to see people with
it
those.
It depends, It's kind of like, this Casual Friday thing is very recent. Creative types, they always wanted the art department, you could get away with a scarf and a vest, stand, all that stuff. They the smell of marijuana permeating the offices was not a detriment at all to clients. They're like, oh, it must be creative in here. And the executive class, for the most part, unless you have Harry Crane's job where you're interacting with Hollywood directly, there's a certain conservatism there. And I believe, actually, that business-wise or not, that people kind of zero in on the style that looks best on them. And, Joan is the most retro-dressed person on the show. And I believe...
We see that in the scenes between Joan and Peggy, especially in this episode.
Yes. I feel like the character, she zeroed in on what looked best on her. Sometimes it's in high school. I see this in my own life,
What has it been for you? For
me, I was raised in a preppy era, and I think I still have a little bit of that. I still like green pants, I try not to overdo it, but that's, the kind of high school debater thing. I don't push the sleeves up on my jacket, and I never had an earring or anything, but I like knit ties. You know what? If I were, as someone who has a good memory for these things, I would zero in on Richard Gere in American Gigolo, which is probably 1982. That was... And it's Armani, basically. That was a fashion earthquake for young private school kids in particular in New York and Los Angeles. And everybody still has a shred of that monotone, textured, whatever that is. You're not going to look like Richard Gere, and you're not going to hang upside down and do sit-ups. But
well, let's hope.
But I don't know, he still looks better than anyone would. You look at these people, and they're like getting old, and you're like, wow, that guy... It's never going to get him. He's still going to look better than I did at 18.
But part of that for me in Don's look, and I wanted to ask you a little bit about this, is he still playing Don Draper, even though we see in this episode he's a lot more relaxed physically. His posture has even changed.
Yeah.
He's even smiling at the start of the episode.
He's dining out on his past, this man who would not even, who would not share, who didn't want his name on the building because, in the first season, his picture's in the paper and his brother finds him. He does not.
He doesn't want to be found out.
He is looking for anonymity. So something has changed, yeah, absolutely. I don't know. You'll have to watch. But it's definitely, that's something that I use in the story. It's been nice to, making this show one episode at a time, not knowing that it was going to go this long, not knowing how far it would go, not knowing some of these, season finales were series finales for me. I had hope, but I didn't know. Finding that whatever my lifetime journey, I'm about 5 or 6 years older than Don, that it's been nice to sort of, I don't have the same life as him, but it's been nice to sort of think about the journey into a certain kind of adulthood.
Because you mentioned Cheever before, but and I think we've talked about this a little bit. I've often found myself thinking about the short stories of Fitzgerald whenever I see the show.
Oh, I will just take that as an amazing compliment. I definitely have read them. Betty Draper had that, the guy who she was riding horses with, recommend The Diamond as Big as the Ritz, which to me is the ultimate boys' adventure story, even though it's got some really perverse stuff in it.
And there's so much mistreatment, there's so much humiliation in the short stories of Fitzgerald.
That's so interesting that you say that. I would never zero in on it. I find that is exactly true. I think a good story is about creating character, and I think this is in Cheever also. And there's some sort of event that is embarrassing. It's like a sitcom. Your main character sort of gets put up there on a ledge and they get a comeuppance of some kind, but it doesn't, the really great writers, it's not a sense of justice. It's not a sense of because you're seeing it from their point of view. So it's not like, look at what a jerk I am. I would say Salinger fits into this as well. Could anyone play with the narrator better than, Good Day for a Banana Fish, where you're just following this man's character and have no idea where it's going to end, and you're dragged into a tragedy. Or what is my favorite one? I have a lot of Fitzgerald short stories that I like, and I started in Heights. I like short stories in general. I love novels, but it's really hard for me, attention span-wise. Fiction-wise, a short story, it's like an episode of TV. Sometimes, actually, it's the best for a movie. But
we talk about this, too, because basically, in short stories, you enter right away.
Yes, and they give you this exposition, this wad of exposition, the great ones, even if it's dialogue, I was thinking about my costume designer, Janie Bryan, is from Tennessee, and I always come up to her and say, from the Ice Palace, I always come up to her and say, what you doing, Sally Carroll? And she's like, what am I supposed to say? I said, you're supposed to say, eating a green peach, expect to die any minute. I love the creation of character, backstory. Sometimes there's more story in the first few sentences of a Cheever story than there'll be in an entire movie. The Enormous Radio. There's just some of these, or just grabbing you right away. My name is Johnny Hake. Exclamation point. You're just in it. And part of it is that they are, unlike a novel, a lot of times they are fighting for your attention. And it has a kind of terseness and dramatic. I don't know how to explain it. There's not a lot of digressions. And with the great ones, again, talking about Cheever and Salinger and Fitzgerald, and let's not leave out Hemingway, because Hemingway ones sometimes stop short all of a sudden at the end, and you are literally sitting there thinking, what was the story about? Why did I read this? Oh, I have that sometimes, Those are so obvious, I've been reading a lot of Alice Munro. I had not discovered her and until she won the Nobel Prize, so that's what it takes basically to get through me. And she's right up there. And it's interesting to see contemporary people in there,
Talking about making an impact in the shortest time possible with Matthew Weiner. He's the creator and executive producer of Mad Men, which is starting its last run of episodes on April 5th. I guess what I think about, though, is that sense of making an impact. And all these stories are talking about people being afraid of being judged on their appearances.
Yeah.
And
getting to go inside their head. And so to know that, it's not like he was a man who was afraid of being judged by his appearance.
That's never said, but but it's certainly something we read, and that idea of Don dressing that way, so people, there's a neutral judgment to his appearance.
He seems a little. I mean, this man is so handsome, and I feel proud of the fact that, unlike most TV shows, I never pretended that was a regular person.
Well, I mean, it's even the dress. Going back to the first season, we've talked about this here, even how shocked I was when people were saying on this show, what a beautiful couple they are.
Yeah, I was like, or that Betty Draper looked like Grace Kelly or anything like that. I'm like, I'm not going to pretend like those are average people. Roger says they were on our wedding cake or something, because I feel like, well, for me, talk about Fitzgerald, the idea of that their beauty has been an advantage to them. I think for Don, his beauty was his ticket to class transformation. It's the story, it's the Ava Gardner story or whatever. It's someone, you can be from the sticks or whatever. If you have the beauty, you will be vaulted to the top of the social strata, and modeling, traditionally being the way.
And even in this first episode of this last one of shows, there's the appearance that there's been some kind of evolution, but he's pulled back into the past, and all that self-hatred and the things he hasn't done, the regrets over the life not lived, come back into play here.
Yes, and I feel like, look, it's very simple. It's a very simple thing that I did not invent. I've gotten to tell this story in a way with the writers. We did not make a list of everything that people wanted to happen to Don Draper and click it off. What we said was, this is one season, despite the absence, despite the distance between the two halves of it. Starting with the first episode of these last 14, you're going to see a man work his way up in his company to gain self-respect, repair his relationship with Peggy, and get to a point of material, satisfaction that has removed most of the other problems in his life. People can talk about money in any way they want, but we are very realistic about it on the show. That amount of money they got, and you see it with Joan in this first episode of this.
And you even see it with Pete sort of talking casually about what to do with it.
Absolutely. That this is a huge problem, that probably the biggest problem in a weird way in people's lives is being removed. So what is left? And that is what I think turned him towards that. He's Don Draper. He's a carnal guy. We see him, just to tell you about losing touch or whatever. Back to this theme again. I'm always defensive about it because I think it's a wish fulfillment that a man that age who looks like that with that job would ever be unrelated to the culture. You look at Playboy magazine and they got these 22-year-old models sitting on the lap of a guy like Don Draper. No sideburns. They got a tie. Guys in a suit and tie. Their status, white guys with a suit and tie, their status at the top of the sexual and social ladder is undisputed forever in America. In fact, if you have enough money and enough power, you can look like Dick Cheney and still be at the top of that thing. There's very few, I don't know if it's a biological thing, but you could basically have 18-year-old girls, and you can call them girls at that point, who are who a billionaire of failing health, maybe that's what they want, I don't know, can spend an evening without ever exchanging a dollar just because he's such an interesting man. So imagine that Don Draper looks like John Hamm, has that job, and has the equivalent of a private plane at that time. The world is his oyster. I dealt with this Twilight Zone on the Sopranos, but the idea about the other place, if you keep going to play roulette and you win every time, it might seem like hell eventually.
It's Dostoevsky's short story, The Gambler.
Is that what that's about? I have read that, and because I like gambling so much, I just saw it as something else.
Probably a good time to take a break. My guest is Matthew Weiner. He's the creator and executive producer of Mad Men. It doesn't smell like creativity in here. It's the treatment that's more to come today with us.
Browse the KCRW store and shop for vacations, wine classes, frequent flyer miles, dinners, and merchandise. Shop to support KCRW only at kcrw.com/store.
Welcome back. We're talking about white men and their money and power with Matthew Weiner, a white man with money and power. He's the creator and executive producer of Mad Men. It's The Treatment. I'm neither of those things, but I will ask you this.
You're good looking. It doesn't matter.
It's radio. Everybody's good looking on radio. Let me say this about what the first 7 episodes of this season and the last episodes of the previous season were. That factors are incrementally understanding that, having an understanding of you. In some ways, Don has started to look outside of himself at himself.
Or inside of himself.
Yeah, but he has a sense of his place as compared to just sort of keeping his nose to the grindstone and trying to keep being a different person during the day than he is at night. That's always been for me, and that's a Fitzgeraldian part of it. That idea once the sun goes down, he gets to sort of go back to these appetites and not be a grown-up person. And those two worlds are kind of disappearing, and we get to see him both at day and at night in this episode.
And there's never been more of it, daytime and nighttime, than at this point in history. And that's what I was responding to. Like, Don Draper will never be out of touch. He is the touch will come to him. So, it's interesting. I watched some of the show before we started writing the last 14 episodes. I did not make it through the entire thing, but I did come across some things that surprised me, because I'm always trying not to repeat myself, and the writers keep track of that. But obviously, there's got to be consistency to the character. And the episode that I frequently talk about as being one of my favorites is called Maiden Form. And there's a moment in that with Bobby Barrett where he has met her for an assignation. And I think it's in that episode. She is the one where he ties her up and leaves her in the hotel room. But what it is her saying, I wanted the Don Draper treatment. And this thing comes out that he has a reputation. How could he not? And it's almost like, this is of the period, reputation being completely reserved for women, but also the idea that this guy has no idea that his libido, his id, if you will, is exposed, and he's very shy about that. He's embarrassed about it. He's embarrassed about it, exactly. And he has his appetites, and he can't seem to control them. But to me, it's been consistent from the beginning of the show that it's a life wish and a death wish. Whether it's him, in my mind, when he dropped his quote-unquote body off at the train station and his brother ran after him and he embarked on his new identity, a beautiful woman says, don't worry about that boy in the box. In my mind, they had sex as the train was pulling out of that station. That is, to me, an activity for him to feel the life force. And we got to deal with it when he came back to Betty in that episode, and he said it doesn't mean that much to him. And my joke was, I think I told you this, asking Don Draper what he thinks about sex is like asking Michael Phelps how he feels about swimming. But I always felt that it was, along with smoking and drinking, a palliative, a medicine to either deaden feelings or escape from feelings. And so daytime and nighttime is a great way to think about it.
I think there's so many things that made me think about this, that he becomes a more primal creature at night, that some of the worst things he said, in fact, when he tells Peggy that's what the money's for, that's happening in the dead of night at the office.
That's a crisis, yeah.
But that's a nighttime thing, that sort of thing where the idea
Do you think maybe the alcohol's added up and the drama is there? I definitely feel like I said, backstage.
I think the alcohol, I think the exhaustion, I think all those things. I think also that he thinks he's a different person at night. And this first episode of this second
Doesn't everybody? I don't sleep that much, so I don't know. I like my naps in the daytime, and I don't need that many hours of sleep. But I'm a morning person.
I don't either. I don't sleep much at night. Maybe 4 hours of sleep. But for me, I feel like there's this thing that happens, especially I think in New York, where nighttime feels like a time when you're away from work for a lot of people.
The city's, I've heard this. It's the city that never sleeps.
I'm going to write this down. I'm getting beautiful epithets from my guest Matthew Weiner. He's the creator and executive producer of Mad Men. It's The Treatment. But that idea that somehow he's not seen at night, which raised its head when Bobby says to him, I want the Don Draper treatment. He feels like when he's doing these things,
it is
he's doing them in a cave.
It's a mask. Yeah, it's a cave. That's good. I hate to sound like another stupid writer. That was not conscious. I mean, I just think I'm glad that it has an artistic resonance. It has not been deliberate in any way. We literally think of things trying to set the scene in the most dramatic way. And, you know, if you were to say to me, like, you use the phone so that people can tell the truth to each other, I would be like, yes. And the phone not being a tool traditionally allowed in movies or TV. The phone is Jackie Gleason wouldn't let Ralph Cramden have a phone because he thought it made the writers lazy.
Yeah,
and it would kill all the stories.
It's an enemy of writing just because people often use it as a way to get exposition across.
It was passed down to me. There's so many edicts that pass down when you work with people who are part of like a sitcom tradition or royalty, like Bob Ellison or something, when they say, "Alex, come with me." That is a reference to Taxi and how you were going to get your main character into the story of your other characters. You know, I have to talk to you. Why didn't you call? And I've always been annoyed by it because I personally find phone calls very dramatic if they're shot right.
Well, also a thing you do too.
And there's so much of my life happens on the phone.
But there's also an adage that appended to writing TV that you work against is the idea of having a television on in a set. And people watching TV.
That's from The Sopranos. That was the first time where I mean, there's an episode called Watching Too Much Television, and David always used it for some like music as counterpoint or whatever. But I don't think anybody even thought of the price of it. You see it occasionally in movies, you know, period movies or something to sort of set the scene.
But people are often afraid that if somebody's watching TV, that it means that then it reminds them that there's a TV at home or that they're watching TV, all these things that you don't want to do.
I actually think that it's a financial situation. It costs money to put things on TV. It limits your shooting because you have to burn it in on the television set. And until very recently, you couldn't have anybody walk in front of that TV in any of the shots. It creates a sound issue. I think The Right Stuff used the TV very well. Phil Kaufman's movie, which is a masterpiece as far as I'm concerned. But I remember the times when I saw it happening. There was a 30-something episode where Michael's character, Ken Olin's character, thinks he's in the Dick Van Dyke Show. It's just like little that felt about like watching TV in the middle of the night. But that was kind of like that was for bus stations. Maybe it's like in, Panic in Needle Park or something like that. That was for like people who like, they show that they have a TV so they can sell it later in the movie. But
I think Ibsen said that. If you got to show a TV, make sure somebody sells it later on in the drama.
No, but I think about the nighttime thing. It's very interesting. It's one of those observations I can't dismiss. So,
well, you just mentioned.
I wish we had more intention to it.
But I think it reveals itself in a way that shows that there is some tacit understanding of what nighttime does, and there's the.
That's why people love Dracula, right?
Sure.
It's also sex at night.
He thinks he's not, again, back to anonymity.
The werewolf.
Yes.
The wolfman.
He thinks, and that nature, going back to that primal, but if you read Dracula, even Frankenstein, because that in those days that there was no illumination in the streets.
Right.
So nighttime was the most dangerous time. But also for him, it offers the perception of the cloak of anonymity.
Absolutely. And he's still there is a man there who like there is for all of us, who has no name.
Sure.
And you're just a person. And we know one thing is that Don Draper likes strangers. And he actually said, he doesn't say it, but it comes up, I think, with Dinkins in the Hawaii episode, which is, I am the man who cannot sleep and talks to strangers.
Well, even going back to the pilot when he's talking to the busboy about cigarettes.
It's supposedly research, but it's really part of having that sort of tenuous identity is it's a fluidity also. I think it's why he's good at his job, is that he can take on multiple points of view.
Well, you really showed that a lot in the first couple of seasons, especially with the scenes with Midge, where he got to be a different people.
Yeah.
He got to be a different person. He got to completely change.
Absolutely.
When there's Miles Davis playing and people being creative, smoking weed in the apartment.
And him saying, remember, I think, it's a crucial part, a moment in the series, or in people's relationship with Don, when the police are out there and they're like, you can't go out there, and he says, you can't.
Yeah.
And he literally looks like Batman, like putting on when he pulls his tie up, he looks like...
No, he actually looks like Bruce Wayne. He's
Bruce Wayne,
yeah.
I'm nobody.
Yes, he's going...
And Harry Crane calls him Batman, actually.
Yeah. But you were mentioning David Chase, and I know you mentioned that you guys talk quite a bit.
Yes.
And he must
it's been one of the great creative pleasures of my life, actually.
And he's got to be a tremendous sounding board. You telling me about what one point you were talking to him about the theme of a season.
Yeah, I remember talking to him I was like, this is going to sound, first of all, the most interesting thing, and there's a story in it in itself.
And we should say David Chase is
creator of The Sopranos, and my boss, who hired me, who discovered me on a dancing in a tiger cage in a Saigon hotel. No, he
did have lots of singles, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
No, he liked the pilot, and he hired me, and was my the Mad Men pilot, and was my boss, and we transitioned into a friendship after he stopped paying me. That has been so fulfilling in every aspect of my life that I suppose I'm so super deferential because I loved The Sopranos before I ever got there, but we're there for each other. I can say that very clearly. And one of the things that's been great is he can keep a secret, and I value his opinion because of his life work and seeing how his brain works. But I remember saying, I think it might have been season 2 or I think it was actually season 3, where I was like, I want to do this season, what I've come to, about who am I? Not just how I'm perceived by other people or anything, but what is the substance that is me? If I were not born in this place at this time, is there a me there that's unrelated to these things? And I thought he was going to be like, that's not very dramatic, or whatever. And he goes, it's only the fundamental question of Western civilization. And I'm like, that's good. And he goes, yes, that's exactly what you should be writing about. I mean, getting that kind of validation on a theme. And we approach story in very different ways, actually. But we both have an inherent shyness that I think is different than some writers right now.
And I think
and he's even better. He never discussed his process or anything. For me, that was part of the sales technique of the show. I mean, people asked me what does that mean? And David Chase would have just walked out, dropped the mic. But I will answer those things. I will say what it means to me. But we're both working in the third person. Tony Soprano has an Aunt Gemma, and so does David Chase. And a lot of the AJ stories are from David's childhood or whatever. There's these places. There's so many correlations between telling an autobiographical story. But David's not a mobster. He's not Tony. He's not married to Carmela. None of that. I equally am working in fiction in the third person, and I think that what you experience in your life and what you observe in a strange way, it doesn't become who you are, but it definitely becomes your work. And a lot of that has to do with sucking up, like a vampire, as Jim Gandolfini used to describe the writing staff of The Sopranos, sucking up the activities and anecdotes and behavior of every single person around you. And as a journalist, when you've written the story right, you've gotten those details in there, and the person who reads it will almost be embarrassed if you've been insightful about it, if you are actually assigning something that's true to them.
We're out of time. I hope you have reasons to come back here. It's always so great talking to you.
You too. And you make me sound really educated, I have to say. You asked me about, you literally hit that's my, if we're on a $64,000 question, American short story writers, male American short story writers from the early century. I got that.
Well, I was going to go with Potent Potable, so I'm glad I did.
I'm terrible at that.
My guest is Matthew Weiner. He is the creator and executive producer of Mad Men, going into its final 7 episodes. I can't thank you enough for doing this, man.
Thank you. I hope to come back soon with something else, Elvis.
You will. Our recording engineer is J.C. Swanwick. It's mixed by Melissa Morton, edited and produced by Jenny Rattolette. I'm Handsome Man and Journalist. This is Treatment. Catch up on past episodes of The Treatment, go to KCRW.com or listen on your smartphone with KCRW's mobile apps, or subscribe to the podcast on iTunes, Stitcher, or wherever you listen to podcasts. The Treatment is produced and distributed by KCRW Santa Monica.